The Silent Revolution. Elijah Carter's stand. In the heart of downtown, where towering glass buildings reflected the ambition of the city's elite, stood a bank renowned for its historical prestige and apparent exclusivity. Its marble floors gleamed under the light of the ornate chandeliers, and the polished counters were manned by impeccably dressed professionals. One could almost feel the weight of power and wealth in the air, as though it were woven into the very fabric of the establishment itself. Elijah Carter walked through the grand revolving doors with the quiet assurance of a man who had earned his place in the world. Clad in a perfectly tailored black suit, his posture straight and purposeful, Elijah exuded a kind of confidence that only those who had fought tooth and nail for every inch of success could. Though his wealth and accomplishments were substantial, his presence was grounded in humility, not arrogance. Elijah was not there to flaunt his fortune. He was there for something far more significant, a loan expansion for his foundation, which had been tirelessly working to uplift underserved communities. Elijah had seen firsthand the kind of transformation financial support could bring to those who had been left behind. His foundation, built from the ground up, was dedicated to providing scholarships, starting businesses, and creating sustainable job opportunities for people in need. He didn't consider himself just a millionaire. He considered himself a servant of the community. Walking through the lobby, Elijah felt a deep sense of purpose. He had done his homework and was confident that the bank would be a willing partner in his vision. He approached the front counter where Margaret Steele, the bank manager, was stationed, performing her duties with an air of cold efficiency. Margaret was known in the banking world for her no-nonsense approach to business, but there were whispers that she held certain biases, an unspoken preference for clientele who fit her image of success. As Elijah walked toward her, her eyes narrowed, taking in the sight of the well-dressed black man approaching her counter. She was unimpressed, her gaze filled with suspicion before Elijah had even spoken a word. "Good afternoon," Elijah said, his voice calm but confident. "I'm Elijah Carter, and I'm here to discuss a potential expansion loan for my foundation." Margaret's eyes flicked from Elijah to the papers he had laid on the counter. Her expression didn't shift. It remained hard, indifferent. "Do you even have an account here?" she asked, her voice devoid of warmth. Elijah didn't let the question rattle him. He knew the answer all too well. "Yes, I've been a client here for over 10 years, he replied, his voice even. But Margaret's skepticism only deepened. She glanced at the documents in his hand, and then returned to her task of rearranging the papers with unnecessary force. "Well, I'm afraid that we don't cater to high-risk clients," she said, her words laced with a thinly veiled judgment. She didn't even bother to look Elijah in the eye as she spoke. The words hung in the air like a heavy fog. "High risk." Elijah repeated, his eyebrow arched in quiet disbelief. "Could you elaborate on what makes me a risk?" Margaret was undeterred by his question, her arms crossed defiantly. "Let's just say we prefer clients with suitable backgrounds," she said, the insinuation clear as day. A tense silence followed her statement. Elijah's gaze remained steady, his heart beating with an unsettling calmness. He was no stranger to discrimination. He had faced it in many forms throughout his life. But the casual nature of Margaret's words stung deeply. He could feel the eyes of the other customers in the bank beginning to turn toward them, sensing the rising tension. Despite the weight of the moment, Elijah didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. He simply stood taller, meeting her condescension with quiet dignity. "Miss Steele," he began, his tone measured but firm, "I would like you to clarify your statement for the record." His words weren't just directed at her. They were directed at the growing audience, the customers who had begun to murmur in disbelief. The bank's reputation was at stake now. Margaret, clearly irritated by Elijah's composed response, waved him off dismissively. "There's nothing to clarify," she muttered, shoving the documents back across the counter. "You can take your business elsewhere." The murmurs from the onlookers grew louder, their discomfort palpable. Some recognized Elijah not just as a successful businessman, but as a philanthropic leader who had helped countless individuals, many of whom the bank had likely overlooked. Elijah's calm demeanor in the face of Margaret's blatant prejudice only made her behavior more glaring. With a quiet nod, Elijah gathered his papers and stood up straight. He didn't allow the sting of her words to take root. "Thank you for your time," he said, his voice betraying no emotion beyond simple politeness. But as he turned and walked away, Elijah felt a surge of energy within him, a fire ignited by injustice that demanded to be addressed. He had no intention of letting this moment pass without consequence, not just for him, but for every other person who had ever been dismissed, overlooked, or silenced because of biases that had no place in society. Outside the bank, Elijah took a deep breath, composing himself for the next step. This wasn't just about one bad interaction. It was about a system that had perpetuated inequality for far too long. He pulled out his phone and made a call. The person on the other end was someone Elijah had known for years, someone with the power to address what had just transpired in that bank. Within minutes, the bank's top regional director, a woman named Cassandra Monroe, arrived at the bank, her face set in a neutral expression as she walked through the front doors. She had received Elijah's call and was fully aware of what had happened. Margaret was still at the counter, blissfully unaware of the storm that was about to hit her. Cassandra was a seasoned professional, a woman who had worked her way up through the ranks of the banking world. She had encountered her own share of obstacles along the way, and she had worked tirelessly to ensure that the institution she represented operated with fairness and integrity. As Cassandra approached, Margaret glanced up, still holding her smug demeanor. "Margaret," Cassandra said calmly, "I'd like to speak with you in private." Margaret hesitated but ultimately followed Cassandra into a back office, leaving Elijah standing in the lobby. For a brief moment, the tension in the air seemed to dissipate, but the anticipation of what was to come hung heavy in the space. The onlookers, many of whom had witnessed Margaret's rude treatment of Elijah, whispered among themselves. They, too, felt the shift in the air. The bank's reputation was on the line. In the back office, Cassandra didn't waste time. "Margaret," she began, her voice firm but controlled, "I was just informed of what transpired with Mr. Carter, and I'm shocked by your behavior. This institution prides itself on treating all clients with respect, regardless of background. Do you understand the gravity of what you've done?" Margaret's defensiveness was immediate. "He's a high-risk client. I just told him." Cassandra held up her hand, cutting her off. "No, that is not your decision to make. Mr. Carter is one of the most successful and respected individuals in this city, and his foundation has done more for this community than you could possibly understand. Your personal biases have no place in this office or in our bank." Margaret's face paled as the weight of her actions settled in. "But—" "No buts," Cassandra interjected. "This will be reported to the board. You will be reassigned immediately, and you'll undergo training to address your prejudices. If you cannot change, you will not have a place here." Outside the office, Elijah stood tall, his face unwavering. He had not reacted with anger, but with resolve. He had stood up for himself, not just because of what had happened to him, but because he understood the larger systemic issue at play. This was his moment to do more than just fight for his own dignity. It was his chance to help dismantle the barriers that had been erected for so many others. As Margaret was escorted out of the building, her departure marked the beginning of a new chapter. One in which Elijah Carter had not only fought for what was right, but had sparked a chain reaction that would reverberate through the institution for years to come. In the days that followed, the bank would implement changes that would ensure fairness and equality for all its clients, no matter their background. Elijah's story was one of resilience, dignity, and quiet strength. It was a reminder that when faced with adversity, it's not always the loudest voice that makes the greatest impact. It's the steady, unwavering stand for what is right. The ripple effect. The cool morning air outside the bank felt like a breath of fresh air to Elijah Carter, as if the weight of what had just transpired was finally beginning to lift off his shoulders. He stood at the edge of the sidewalk, watching as cars passed by in a steady stream, the city moving forward as it always did. But inside, Elijah knew something had changed, something important. The moment he had experienced inside that bank wasn't just a personal battle. It was the start of something larger, a wave that would soon ripple far beyond those marble walls. As he took a moment to gather his thoughts, his phone buzzed in his hand. It was a message from Cassandra Monroe, the bank's regional director. "Elijah, we've got your back. I'll personally ensure that the foundation's loan gets the attention it deserves. We're taking immediate action here. Margaret's behavior will not be tolerated, and we're going to make sure this bank learns from this experience. Thank you for standing firm. I'll be in touch soon to make sure everything is set up." Elijah stared at the words for a moment. A sense of gratitude mixing with the quiet sense of satisfaction came from knowing he had not only confronted injustice, but had begun to dismantle it. The fact that Cassandra had responded so swiftly gave him hope. It wasn't just about one person's prejudice. It was about an institution realizing the depth of its responsibility to serve everyone, not just those who fit a narrow, preconceived mold. He tucked the phone back into his pocket and walked away, head held high. As he crossed the street and headed toward the cafe where he often met with members of his foundation, his mind raced with the possibilities of the future. There was so much work still to do, but today had been a victory, and Elijah understood that every victory, no matter how small it seemed, contributed to a greater cause. Inside the bank, the aftermath of Elijah's confrontation with Margaret Steele was nothing short of a shockwave. After Cassandra had escorted Margaret out of the building, the remaining staff stood frozen in place, a mixture of confusion and disbelief on their faces. No one had expected such an explosive incident to unfold that morning, let alone have it result in the downfall of one of the bank's top managers. But as the news spread, so did a sense of resolve among those who had witnessed the exchange. The customers who had been in the lobby, many of them business owners, professionals, and community leaders, began to reflect on what they had seen. Some had recognized Elijah immediately, while others were taken aback by the way he had handled the situation. His composure, his grace under pressure, and his refusal to engage in anger had left a lasting impression. And it wasn't just the crowd that was moved. It was the people who ran the bank, those who had the power to make change. Cassandra Monroe, having already initiated a full review of Margaret's actions, turned her attention toward addressing the larger implications of the incident. As a senior regional director, she knew that the institution's reputation had been put on the line. This was no minor infraction. This was a matter of systemic bias that had likely gone unnoticed for too long. It was not enough to simply reprimand one person. It was a call to action for the entire banking industry. Cassandra immediately called an emergency meeting with her colleagues, other senior leaders from the bank's various branches. As they sat around a large conference table in the bank's headquarters, the air was thick with tension. They all knew the stakes. "We cannot afford to ignore what just happened," Cassandra began, her voice steady but resolute. "This is not an isolated incident. What we witnessed today was a failure of leadership and a breakdown in our commitment to equality and fairness. We cannot simply sweep this under the rug. Margaret Steele's behavior was wrong, but we also have to ask ourselves, how much of this exists within our system?" The room grew quiet. One by one, the heads of different departments and regions nodded, acknowledging the truth in Cassandra's words. It wasn't just one rogue employee. This was a reflection of something deeper, something ingrained in the way they had been doing business. "We need to review every client interaction, every loan application, every policy," Cassandra continued. "This goes beyond diversity training. This is about creating a culture where everyone feels valued, no matter their race, background, or economic status." As the meeting progressed, the leaders discussed ways to implement real change, from revising hiring practices to ensuring that all employees were trained in anti-bias and anti-discrimination programs. They also agreed on the importance of developing a new client-facing protocol, one that would actively combat prejudice and ensure that all clients were treated with the dignity they deserved. But perhaps most importantly, they knew that the bank had to make a public statement. They needed to show the world that they were committed to the principles of equality and inclusion. And so, they crafted a response, one that would not only address the actions of Margaret Steele, but also demonstrate their long-term dedication to building a better, more just financial institution. Back at Elijah's Foundation headquarters, the phone calls began to pour in. News outlets, community leaders, and even other organizations looking to partner with his foundation reached out in support. But amidst the whirlwind of attention, Elijah remained grounded. He knew that the path forward would require more than just words. It would require sustained action. Later that evening, as Elijah sat down with his team over dinner, he spoke candidly about the events of the day. "You all saw what happened today," Elijah began, looking around the table at the faces of the people who had helped him build the foundation from the ground up. "And this isn't just about me. This is about all of us. Every person who has ever been dismissed, overlooked, or treated as less than because of who they are. Today, we stood up not just for our own dignity, but for everyone who has ever faced discrimination." There was a moment of silence before one of the team members spoke up. "You know, Elijah," she said, her voice filled with admiration, "the way you handled that situation, without resorting to anger or aggression, was truly remarkable. It wasn't just about getting justice for you. It was about standing up for the future. You showed the world that even in the face of adversity, dignity and calm strength can lead the way." Elijah nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his lips. "Exactly. This isn't about getting revenge or making a spectacle. It's about making sure that people understand that we won't tolerate discrimination, any discrimination, no matter where it happens. And when we stand up together, when we hold institutions accountable, we create the kind of change that lasts." As the evening wore on, Elijah's team discussed their next steps, making plans for future outreach and expanding their work. They knew they had an important mission ahead of them, but they also understood that today had been a turning point. Their foundation was no longer just a charitable organization. It had become a beacon of hope for those who needed it most. In the weeks that followed, the ripple effect of Elijah's stand grew. The bank's public statement was met with widespread praise, and many of the customers who had witnessed the altercation praised the institution for its swift action and commitment to reform. The foundation's work received even more attention, and new partnerships and donations flooded in. But perhaps the greatest change came within the bank itself. New policies were implemented, and a broader culture shift began to take root. Employees who had previously ignored or dismissed the importance of inclusion now found themselves actively involved in conversations about diversity, equity, and fairness. Margaret Steele's actions had triggered a shift toward creating spaces where everyone felt valued, respected, and supported. Elijah Carter had set out to expand his foundation's work, but in doing so, he had inadvertently sparked a revolution, one that would continue to unfold in ways he had never imagined. A new beginning. The days that followed Elijah Carter's encounter at the bank were a blur of media attention, phone calls, and public support. His name was now synonymous with dignity and justice, but Elijah knew better than to bask in the fleeting glow of recognition. This was not about personal acclaim. It was about a vision, a movement that was larger than any one individual. The incident had sparked more than just a wave of reaction. It had ignited a broader conversation about systemic inequality, implicit bias, and the importance of standing up for what was right. In the weeks that followed, Elijah's foundation experienced an unprecedented surge in support. Donations flooded in, and new partnerships blossomed, as businesses and community leaders from all corners of the city reached out to collaborate. People from all walks of life saw Elijah not only as a successful businessman, but as someone who embodied the spirit of resilience and change. He had taken what many would have considered an insult and turned it into an opportunity to elevate others, to reshape perceptions and spark action in ways that went far beyond the confines of that bank's marble lobby. But even as the world around him celebrated his triumph, Elijah remained focused. He knew that the path ahead was long, and that real, lasting change required more than just moments of confrontation. It required a relentless commitment to pushing boundaries, challenging norms, and fostering a culture of empathy, understanding, and inclusion. One afternoon, as Elijah walked through his foundation's headquarters, his mind was preoccupied with the work ahead. The initial rush of media coverage had started to wane, but he had never been one to rest on his laurels. He had been in this fight for far longer than anyone realized. From growing up in a neighborhood where opportunities were scarce to becoming a self-made millionaire, Elijah had faced his share of obstacles. But what truly fueled his drive was the knowledge that he was part of something much bigger than himself. The phone rang on his desk, pulling him from his thoughts. He answered quickly, recognizing the number as belonging to Cassandra Monroe, the regional director from the bank. Elijah. Cassandra's voice was warm, yet there was a sense of urgency in her tone. "I need to speak with you about something important." "Of course," Elijah replied, leaning back in his chair. "What's going on?" "Well," Cassandra began, "the changes we've implemented since that day at the bank have been significant. We've brought in a new diversity and inclusion officer, revamped our loan application process to ensure that no one is unfairly judged based on their background, and we've begun holding internal workshops on implicit bias. But the real breakthrough is something that I think you'll be interested in." Elijah raised an eyebrow, curious. "What's the breakthrough?" "We've decided to launch a new initiative aimed at supporting businesses in underserved communities," Cassandra said, her voice growing more enthusiastic. "But not just any businesses, your businesses. We want to partner with your foundation to provide microloans and mentorship to emerging entrepreneurs in the very communities you've been working to uplift." Elijah was silent for a moment, taken aback by the magnitude of what she was suggesting. He had always known that financial institutions had the power to change lives, but hearing that the bank was now offering a partnership of this scale felt like a breakthrough in itself. This was more than just a gesture. This was an opportunity to change the trajectory of entire communities. "That sounds incredible, Cassandra," Elijah said, his voice filled with gratitude. "But why us? Why now?" Cassandra's tone became serious. "Elijah, after what happened that day, we realized something. We have a responsibility, not just to the wealthy clients who come through our doors, but to every community we serve. Your foundation has been doing work that we've overlooked for too long. You've been lifting people up, and now we want to help you do it on a larger scale. We believe this partnership will not only benefit the businesses in these neighborhoods, but it will also help us redefine what it means to be a bank that truly serves the people." Elijah felt a lump form in his throat. This wasn't just about business. It was about something deeper, something more profound. For the first time, it felt as though his work was being truly recognized by an institution that had once turned its back on him. "I'm on board," he said, his voice firm with conviction. "Let's make this happen." The partnership between Elijah's foundation and the bank was announced in a joint press release that captured the attention of both the media and the public. The initiative would offer small business loans, mentorship programs, and access to a network of influential leaders in the business world. But perhaps most importantly, it would provide opportunities to those who had long been excluded from traditional financial systems. As word spread about the program, Elijah found himself at the center of a new wave of inspiration. Entrepreneurs from all over the city, especially from historically marginalized communities, began to reach out, eager to be a part of the initiative. They saw in Elijah not just a successful businessman, but a symbol of hope, a person who had fought against the odds, and through perseverance and courage, had changed the landscape for everyone. In the months that followed, the foundation's impact expanded exponentially. The microloans and mentorship programs took off, and several small businesses that had once struggled to survive began to thrive. From tech startups to local restaurants, the stories of these entrepreneurs became a beacon of possibility. Proof that when people are given the right tools and resources, they can achieve incredible things. Elijah personally visited many of the businesses, offering guidance and encouragement to the entrepreneurs he had helped lift up. Each visit was a reminder of why he had started this journey in the first place, not for recognition, but for the deep, unwavering belief that everyone deserved a chance to succeed. Despite the success of the initiative, Elijah knew that the work didn't end there. The bank's partnership was a step in the right direction, but there was still much more to be done. He continued to push for greater changes in other sectors: education, healthcare, and even government, urging those in positions of power to look beyond their own biases and understand the real needs of communities that had been historically underserved. One evening, as Elijah sat in his office, reflecting on the progress that had been made, he received another unexpected call. This time, it was from a former colleague, a close friend from his early years in the business world. "Elijah, I've been following everything that's been happening," his friend said. "What you've done with the bank is incredible. But I've been thinking, we need to take this beyond just financial services. We need a new movement, something that brings people together, not just to address economic inequality, but all forms of injustice." Elijah sat up, intrigued. "What do you have in mind?" "I'm talking about a nationwide coalition," his friend said. "A group of businesses, nonprofits, activists, and everyday citizens who are committed to driving change. A movement that challenges systems of power, whether it's in business, education, or even law enforcement. I think you're the perfect person to lead it." Elijah felt a sense of purpose welling up inside him. He had spent years fighting for justice in small ways, but now, the opportunity to create a nationwide movement was within his grasp. This was a chance to unite people from all walks of life, to bring about a transformation on a scale that he had only dreamed of. With a determined smile, Elijah replied, "Let's make it happen." As Elijah began to lay the groundwork for the movement, he knew that the path ahead would be difficult. There would be obstacles, challenges, and setbacks along the way. But he also knew that the power of collective action could overcome even the most entrenched systems. This wasn't just about one man's mission. It was about creating a world where fairness, dignity, and opportunity were available to all. Elijah Carter had already shown the world that one person, standing firm in the face of discrimination, could spark a revolution. But now, as he prepared to lead a nationwide movement, he understood that true change wasn't just about the battles won. It was about the victories still to come. The world was watching, and Elijah was ready to make his mark. The journey had just begun. The lasting legacy, Elijah Carter's call to action. As the months passed, Elijah Carter's journey continued to unfold in ways that even he hadn't anticipated. What had started as a singular moment of injustice in a prestigious bank had turned into a catalyst for something much larger, a movement built on the principles of dignity, equality, and opportunity for all. Through his unwavering commitment to making a difference, Elijah had sparked a revolution, not through anger or aggression, but through patience, resilience, and the quiet strength of standing firm in the face of adversity. The nationwide coalition he had helped create began to grow rapidly, uniting business leaders, activists, and everyday citizens in a collective effort to dismantle systemic inequality and bring about meaningful change. It wasn't an easy road. There were setbacks, obstacles, and moments when the weight of the work seemed overwhelming. But Elijah never wavered. He knew that the path to a better world was rarely straightforward, and that the greatest transformations often began with the smallest acts of defiance. In the years that followed, Elijah's foundation continued to flourish. The microloan programs he had initiated with the bank provided a lifeline for hundreds of entrepreneurs who had long been ignored by traditional financial institutions. Communities that had once struggled with unemployment, lack of resources, and limited access to education now had a fighting chance. And the ripple effect of those changes began to spread as other organizations, businesses, and even government entities took note of the positive outcomes. Elijah's story was no longer just his own. It had become a story for every person who had ever been told they weren't enough, who had been marginalized, who had been ignored or dismissed simply because of their background. It was a story of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, change was possible, but only if you had the courage to stand up for what was right. But perhaps the greatest lesson Elijah's journey imparted was this: real change doesn't happen in the heat of a single moment. It happens over time, through persistence, through the courage to challenge the status quo, and through the willingness to uplift others along the way. Elijah had not just fought for himself. He had fought for an entire generation, for the future of communities that had long been denied the opportunities they deserved. As he stood at the helm of his foundation, watching young entrepreneurs thrive, watching communities rebuild, and witnessing the slow but steady transformation of the systems that had once held people back, Elijah realized that his work was far from over. He had done what he set out to do, and more. But the fight for justice, for equity, and for opportunity would never truly end. It would continue as long as there were people who needed to be heard, and as long as there were systems that needed to be challenged. And so, as the years passed, Elijah Carter's legacy grew. He became a beacon of hope for all who felt that the odds were stacked against them. He proved that one man's refusal to accept injustice could create a ripple that changed the world. His story wasn't just about confronting prejudice in one bank. It was about confronting prejudice in every institution, every system, and every heart that still held on to the belief that some people were less than others. Elijah's message was clear: stand up, speak out, fight for what's right, and always, always lift others as you rise. His legacy was not defined by the wealth he had accumulated or the accolades he had received. It was defined by the lives he touched, the communities he empowered, and the movement he helped build. And as the story of Elijah Carter's remarkable journey spread, one thing became certain: when you stand firm in your beliefs, even in the face of adversity, you can change not just your own future, but the future of an entire world. The call to action was simple: be the change you wish to see in the world. Elijah Carter had answered that call, and in doing so, had created a lasting legacy of hope, justice, and transformation that would inspire generations to come. The question now was, who would answer the call next?